Over on MSNBC, they have an analyst named Elie Mystal. We're told that he's a lawyer, don't you know? You know what this guy looks like. He's the black dude with the white Q-tip fro. He's something else. And if you thought the last time you were going to have to see him on television was on Joy Reid's last show, you're mistaken, because he was a special guest on Morning Joe today, and he said something rather stunning about voter registration laws. They had a list. It's a book that he's got out. You see it over his shoulder, called Bad Law, where he put together a list of bad laws in our country, racist laws, vestiges of the inherent racism and systemic racism in America. And one of those bad laws has to do with registering to vote. Take a look.
Okay, so like what?
Well, we could eliminate all voter registration laws. See, when Democrats get in charge, we try to protect voting rights. We don't make voting easier. Now, I'm all for voter eligibility requirements. We might disagree about what those requirements should be, but I'm going to say that there should be an age limit to vote. I might say 16, you might say 18, but I'm not going to say 8.
I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to stop you right there, Elie. Because I love it when someone on the right, like me, and someone way over there on the left, like Elie Mystal, when we can agree on something, and we both agree that there should be an age requirement to vote. All right, now, Elie, let's say you say it's 18. It sounded like you just said you want it to be 18. So here's my question for you. How does the voter in question prove that they are old enough to vote? Say it, Elie. Say it. If you agree there should be an age requirement to vote, how does the voter prove that they are, in fact, that age? Say it. You can't say it, can you? Because you want to do away with voter ID laws at the same time, don't you? Don't you? Elie, the only way to prove that you are the age that you say you are is to show a photo ID. You know how I know? Because I've been to a bar or restaurant in America in the last 50 years. So Elie is a liar. Elie is a fraud. Elie is pretending to be reasonable when in fact he is a radical, because he is against all voter ID laws and against all voter registration laws, as you just heard. And yet at no point in the entire process is he willing to accept an identification of said voter to prove they are eligible based on anything. And that's why he wants to do away with all these registration laws.
Right? So we're going to agree that there should be voter eligibility requirements. But once you're eligible, why do you have to pre-register? Why is that even a thing? It wasn't a thing in this country at the founding. We didn't have voter pre-registration in 1787. We didn't have voter pre-registration in 1821. We only started having voter registration, generally speaking, after the Civil War. Why do you think that is? It's because a bunch of freed African slaves were migrating up north, and all of a sudden New York was like, we need some registration up in here, right? A bunch of immigrants from Europe, mainly Ireland and Italy, were coming to New York. People were like, oh, we need some registration in here. If you're eligible to vote, you should be automatically registered to vote, and that is how they do it everywhere else but us.
All right. Now, that is a fascinating diatribe and lie that he just laid out there for you. And I'm shocked, I tell you, to learn that voter registration laws, one of the laws that he wants to do away with, is in fact a vestige of slavery and racism in this country. Because I never hear Elie Mystal make that argument on that network. God, how boring these people are. Although I got to say, that's a natty suit, Reverend Al. Should I get Kevin, do I need a suit like that? Would that liven up our show?
Absolutely.
We'll get more clicks, right? Who doesn't want to click on Larry wearing that crap? In fact, I think I want you to call me Reverend Larry from now on, Kevin. Are you down with that?
Absolutely not happening.
All right. So Elie Mystal thinks that voter registration laws only came to this country because of the Civil War and racism, although he sort of revealed the truth there. Did you hear where he said we had immigrants coming like from Ireland into that's why we had voter registration laws, because we immediately had a huge influx at the end of the 19th century. Because of the Industrial Revolution, we had a huge influx of foreigners coming into this country who were not eligible to vote. And we're talking millions and millions coming in, past Ellis Island into New York Harbor. You got all these people in the country. Some of them can vote, some of them can't. So you needed to register them to vote. Also, why didn't we have to register to vote back in the election of 1821 and the election? Because they were all paper ballots. They were all paper ballots, Ellie. Are you willing to go back to paper ballots? Are you? Are you? Say it, Ellie. Say it. You want to go back to paper ballots again? Then we'll talk about it. Of course not. All right, keep going, Ellie. You're on a roll. What else is racism?
Everywhere else but us either has automatic registration or some other form of forced registration for everybody so that you don't have this disconnect between eligible voters and registered voters. That's the first law in the book that we could change. And it's to see how that's different than just saying we have to protect voting rights. No. We don't have to protect voting rights. We have to expand voting rights so that the 90 million people that sat on the couch and sat out this last election between democracy and fascism, so that maybe they have a little bit of an easier time to get up off the couch and come participate in the democracy.
Okay, so he thinks that 90 million people sat it out because there were registration laws that barred them from coming in. That's not true. In fact, even voters who had registered and were totally eligible to vote didn't vote because of one reason or another. Who knows? But that's not really the government's job to figure out. You can vote. If you don't vote, that's your deal. Who gives a crap? Okay, if you really want to vote and it matters to you, you'll figure out a way. And you'll make sure that you're registered to vote ahead of time. Hey, Ellie, you want to get the kind of voter turnout that we see in other countries, countries that we fight and die for so that they can finally have democracy, where they've been living on an authoritarian rule, like in Iraq and Afghanistan. Remember when they had their first free elections in Afghanistan? Remember how everybody went in to vote and they had to dip their fingertip into purple dye that would stay there for a couple of days so that they wouldn't accidentally vote again or deliberately vote again, so that you could do away with voter fraud? I'd be down with that. You want to do that, Ellie? How about we dip the little purple finger so that people don't vote more than once? And by the way, in Afghanistan and Iraq and all those other countries that you just mentioned, they have photo ID laws. We're the only country on the planet that doesn't have a photo ID law. You keep saying we should do it like all the other countries. I just heard that it's outrageous that we have these voter registration laws here because no other country on the planet has it. All those other countries have photo ID so that you prove you are who you say you are. Are you down with that, Elle? Let's do it. Can I call you Elle? I feel like we're friends. I think like we know each other. All right, so no mail-in ballots, no drop-off ballots, no absentees, and you'd have to dip your fingertip in the purple ink, and you have to show a photo ID. Are you willing to do all of those things so we can be like all the other countries on the planet? And we'll have our results that night. None of this bullshit counting ballots for a week and a half or 2 weeks so that you can figure out how many votes you need to swing the election or the House. None of that. Just like those other countries that you envy so much, let's have protocols in place so that we can count those ballots and have our results that night, Ellie. Okay? Okay? Yeah, I didn't think so. But his crazy is not done yet. He had more crazy. Let's see what other crazies he's got.
Restoration of people in our community.
So highlight one more of these laws for us that you dive into in the book.
Yeah, so I go really hard on immigration. People who are following the tragedy and the abduction of Mahmoud Khalil have recently become aware that the 1921 Immigration and Nationality Act allows Marco Rubio to pull people's green cards by fiat, just because he says so. Well, in this book, I talk about how the 1921 Immigration and Nationality Act is one of the worst laws in the country that was made based on the testimony and science of a Nazi eugenicist. And when I say a Nazi eugenicist, I mean he's an American eugenicist that did so well, the Nazis was like, bring him over here. We're going to give him a medal at the University of Heidelberg in 1935. But in 1921, he helped Congress write the Immigration and Nationality Act, which remains one of the most racist laws in our country. That is something that we could change tomorrow that would not only free people like Mahmoud Khalil, but completely reform and reimagine our immigration process.
The new book, Bad Law.
I love the hair toss at the end there. Look at me go. All right, Ellie, if we want to re-examine any laws that were put in place on the books because of testimony in Congress from a Nazi eugenicist, could we talk about Margaret Sanger and every single law supporting legalized infanticide known as abortion in this country? Because you really should Google Margaret Sanger, Ellie, if you're worried about eugenicists and people who are interested in, building a master race and killing a bunch of people who are born or preborn with dark skin, because that's literally what Planned Parenthood was created out of. Number two, He's a moron. Marco Rubio is not invoking the 1920 immigration law to do. I just want to reveal something to you. Elie Mystal is citing Marco Rubio and Mahmoud Khalil and the deportation of people who are in this country on either student visas or in this country illegally or in this country as legal residents, as Mahmoud Khalil is, not as an immigrant, an actual citizen of this country. He claims that he's citing all of the things out of today's headlines over the last 3 weeks as examples that reinforce the book that he just wrote. He wrote this book 7 or 8 months ago. That's how the publishing world works. All right. So there's nothing in that book about Marco Rubio deporting Mahmoud Khalil, number one. Number two, the Secretary of State is not utilizing the 1920 Immigration Act as basis for getting rid of Mahmoud Khalil. They're actually, if you remember right, using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, to deport all of the Venezuelan gang members and send them out who are in this country illegally. And they're using existing immigration law for Mahmoud Khalil, which is not the 1920 law. We've had subsequent immigration laws in this country. There was one in the late 1960s that really changed the way we handle immigration in this law. And we also had an Immigration Reform Act of 1987 that has been in place. All right, so he's just lying to you that this has anything to do with the 1920s immigration law. But that law did put in place a lot of protocols having to do with the encouragement of immigration from European nations that sort of normalized what had been going on haphazardly in the late 19th century. And yes, there was an emphasis in that law that was written from the legislators at the time in the 1920s saying, listen, we got a huge demand for immigration to this country from Europe, so we're going to figure out basic quotas based on those European countries. And everyone looks at it through today's lenses 100 years later saying, wow, that seems really racist because we're only emphasizing European nations, because that's where the demand was. That's where people coming into this country were. But in the 60s, they revamped that. And they turned the whole thing into, it doesn't matter what country you came from, we're going to go ahead and do immigration based on these numbers. But guess what, Ellie? The American government has the 100% right to determine how to make up their nation. And if we choose we want to bring in people from this country and not from that country, we have every right to do that as a people. Every single, he keeps comparing these laws to other countries on the planet. Did you notice that on immigration, he didn't do that? Because literally every other country on the planet reserves the right to determine who becomes a citizen of their country or not. And they often do it based on where you're coming from and who you are and what you believe and whether you're going to fit in well or not. And it's okay for us to decide that a pro-Hamas terrorist sympathizer, Mahmoud Khalil, does not fit in well with the understanding, ethic, and determination of the people of this nation. Let's not forget, this is Elie Mystal. Elie Mystal, months ago on the Joy Reid show, which is where he usually showed up all the time, said things like this.
The reason why it doesn't end his career is because his supporters are just as despicable. All right. Like Trump's whole thing, he's a narcissist, right? And so his whole thing is to have a complete lack of compassion and empathy for everybody else. It's all about him. That's why he lies about 9/11. It's all about him, me. He's probably the least compassionate president we've had in 200 years since Andrew Jackson. And it works for him because his supporters are just as ungenerous and have just as little compassion and empathy for others. So
all right, so you'll remember I say this all the time on this program, that all of the hatred toward Trump and Trump's cabinet, Trump's vice president, Trump's secretaries, it's really hatred toward you. They hate you. Everything they say about Trump and about J.D. Vance and about these guys, they really think about you. Now, they'll never say it because they want you to be a viewer. You know, believe it or not, these networks like MSNBC, owned by Comcast Universal, that same company that asked you to spend a lot of money to go down to their theme park in Orlando or in Los Angeles and want you to go out and buy a bunch of their movie tickets and all the popcorn at the theater for $100 and some odd bucks. Those people don't want to insult you. So they claim that their insults and their criticism is really for Donald Trump. At least Elie Mystal actually said it out loud there with Joy Reid, that the supporters are the problem. The people who vote for Trump are the problem. They're racist. They're narcissists. They're mean. They're angry. They're horrible people. But here's what you need to know. Not only did he say that on MSNBC a couple of months ago, but they keep inviting this guy back. And there's never anybody there that pushes back on him and says, hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. I think you're wrong about that, Elie. I think that actually there are some good people out there. I think that you're wrong about this. Basically saying all the things that I've said on this program, who could have said, wait a second, that's not true about voter registration. That's not true about foreign countries. That's not true about the immigration laws. There was no one on the panel today at MSNBC who pushed back one iota. Elie Mystal, a man who just went on Joy Reid's show months ago, accusing you, supporters of Donald Trump, of being mean and racist and horrible people. MSNBC invites him back time and time and time again, including this morning, to help sell his book. Because one can only conclude that Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough at that MSNBC panel this morning, and NBC News at 30 Rock, and NBC Entertainment, and Comcast Universal, that publicly traded company, they think this too. They agree. Otherwise, they'd either stop inviting him on, or maybe they'd bring a reasonable person on to contest his assertions. But they don't. So I guess, Elie, if you reach the conclusion that people vote for Trump, Trump is a racist, that means the Trump voters are a racist. Well, let me play that game for a minute. Elie Mystal, I believe, is a racist. I believe Elie Mystal is actually a duplicitous jerk. I think Elie Mystal hates this country. And I think Elie Mystal is just fine lying about this country and dragging this country through a pile of crap to make it look bad so that he can enrich himself. And since Comcast Universal keeps hiring him and giving him this platform, I've got to think that that's what Comcast Universal thinks about this country too. So when you're planning your next vacation and you want to go to a theme park, I think you should choose wisely, because look what Universal thinks of you. But remarkably, what Elie Mystal said on MSNBC this morning is not the craziest thing that you'll hear. No. If you flipped over to CNN, where Wolf Blitzer now does things in the morning because, well, Jim Acosta wasn't good enough, you'd hear something even crazier.
We've learned, Congresswoman, that the administration dropped charges against an alleged key MS-13 gang leader and handed him over to the Salvadoran government. Investigators believe he had information that could implicate top Salvadoran government officials and possibly corrupt deals with the gang. Are you concerned by this development?
I'm concerned about how they are conducting their immigration deportation policies, seizing of American citizens without due process. While we know that many of these people may not be American citizens, they are immigrants, whether they are here illegally or through the process, we rely on our rule of law to ensure that every individual is afforded whatever the law has given them the rights to. And by handing them over without adjudication, that is extremely troubling. As a member of the Intelligence Committee, we know that our cooperation and discussion and the rules that we have put in place with other countries ensures that Americans as well are safe when they go to other countries. We would be aghast if this were to happen to an American overseas, and we need to ensure that we are operating under the same rules that we would expect our own citizens to have when they're somewhere else.
There you go. So illegal immigrant, violent gang members who have been convicted of such crimes, they deserve to be treated respectfully and lovingly, just like we would expect an American citizen to be treated. That's where the Democrats stand right now on these policies. And they have a very different view of the law in this country than you and I do. It's kind of scary, actually, but that's who they are. And there's no stopping them. At least they make the choice very clear. And it's easy for us to decide which side we're going to be on.